handle the truth.
Yes, welcome to Truth versus News Incorporated. I'm Donald Brown, your host at JD.Consultants Live.com, right here in Tahiti on June 22nd. Just enjoyed a great dip in the ocean, and we're going to get going on this show right now to see what's really happening up there in America. And so it's really a great time to get some truth and news out there that's really happening. And I have the best people in the world here, Jim Tetcher, who's a great spirit and the fantastic, most dangerous mind in America, and the most articulate man in America is Scott Bennett. He's just tremendous. So let's get going today, Jim, and let's see what happened. How about Trump? What's Trump up to?
Well, let's see, Don. Yes. Trump to the Tulsa crowd, silent majority, stronger than ever. He gave a very spirited presentation. The smaller than expected crowd robbed him of the ability to highlight enthusiasm, but it's overwhelmingly greater. Actually, some 63% of supporters of Trump say they're very enthusiastic. Around 32% say that of Joe Biden. He brushed aside criticism, went ahead with a multi-faceted response. The unhinged left-wing mob is trying to vandalize our history, desecrate our monuments, tear down our statues, punish, cancel, and persecute anyone who doesn't conform to their demands for absolute and total control. We're not conforming. Well done. Turns out Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez actually was boasting of the fact that anti-Trumpers were punking the campaign by fake reservations for the crowd. This is very juvenile. Seems to me to reinforce the impression that Democrats are the party of children, the Republicans the party of adults. Meanwhile, we had a second night of shooting at the Black Lives Vigil in Atlanta. It's very troublesome because things are getting out of control. Meanwhile, Muhammad Ali's son says his dad would have hated the racist Black Lives Matter. Oh. Very thoughtful observation. Don't bust up stuff. Don't trash the place, he told the Post. You can peacefully protest. And here is a figure all very familiar, where Muhammad Ali is in my pantheon of the four greatest Americans of all time, along with Jack Kennedy, Bill Russell, and Bobby Kennedy. Muhammad Ali may be the greatest of all. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, it's very telling that the black, I'd say the black slave masters, the black, Jesse Jackson, and not so much as the fight guy, the guy who rigs fights, because he was always Republican, I think.
Ron King.
King, but all these other parasite blacks, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, others, they abuse and live off the blood of their own people, and they're happy and they celebrate Donald Trump when he's out of the political arena, but when the moment he goes into the arena and by nature starts swinging his sword in the direction that accord with his values. His values are freedom and capitalism and liberty and prosperity and hope, and unshackling people, unshackling them from ignorance and fear and doubt, and in that unshackling liberty, incline them and encourage them towards self-determination, self-reliance. The moment he does that is the moment he's taking the oarman out of the boat of Jesse Jackson. Remember the movie Ben-Hur, where you had all the slaves under the galley rowing the boat? Jesse Jackson sees himself on top of the deck and all the blacks underneath him rowing the boat. Donald Trump comes in and starts saying, hey, get out, get your own boat, go do your own thing. And suddenly Jackson doesn't have an organization. He's not a real preacher. So that's why these people revile Donald Trump, is because he is naturally liberating to people. And, people see that. His rally I saw in Tulsa I thought was very, very good. I'm not going to spend a lot of time celebrating what we know is obvious. He's a very good talker. He can be better. he is an acquired taste to a certain degree because he doesn't have, the academic smoothness or the poetic rhetorical gifts or oratory. He's got a lower brow sort of manner about him, but it works for him. It's who he is. He's from Queens or the Bronx or whatever the New York thing is. It does work for him. And you see that in the faces of the thousands of people that really honestly rejoice in looking at his face, and they like his energy. They like his rawness, as I said to Susan Lindauer. And that's just the way he is. And he's got the family that loves him, his children and his grandchildren, and that boosts him up as a man. What I see happening between now and Election Day, remember, things don't get exciting until after Labor Day. However, we're in a period of time where every single video needs to be collected and saved and then formatted into a political advertisement that eventually in September, October, November is going to play 30-second clips of, here's the Democrat America, old ladies pushing shopping carts, getting pushed over by black thugs, police cars spray painted and burning and overthrown, police officers in hospital beds crippled from the neck down, dead police, their wives and their children wailing in sadness, the destroyed businesses and the destroyed areas that will never come back, that are now dead zones, toxic zones, uninhabitable because of the monstrosity and the cruelty and the perversion and the madness. The Seattle Chopper Chaz, the autonomous zone. This is Democrat America. This is what Joe Biden and the Democrats want. If you want that, vote for Biden. If you want stability and hope and peace and moms and dads throwing frisbees on the grass for their kids without wearing masks, and America, it's great in America again, morning in America again, as Ronald Reagan's advertisements were, then vote for Donald Trump. All of these things are right in front of us. These videos of these, people being brutalized, the black guy chasing the woman down in the park where he beats her savagely. Those are the videos we want to put out for Americans to clearly see. This is your choice. Brutality, mob rule, madness, and death of the majority of the white people in this country. Let's not be shy about it. That's what these thugs and Black Lives Matter and all of these Antifa types want, is white guilt and subservience. Now it's your time to be a slave. Now it's your time to give reparations. That's what they want. You want that? Be prepared for that judgment. If you reject it, vote for Donald Trump, vote for autonomy, vote for peace. And of course, all the black people that were at Trump's rally, you never saw such happy, dancing, smiling black people ever. And that's why Donald Trump is so successful, because he's not a racial guy. And you and I know this, Jim, from our days in the military, and I encountered it in the government. There is no black-white, prejudice or bigotry in the military or in government or in the Donald Trump camp. I think the best black people are going towards Trump, while the most ignorant and criminal are trying to keep their people in criminal ignorance. Jim?
Oh, I think you got it exactly right. Exactly right, Scott. Very, very nice critique. Meanwhile, we had that report of 800,000 people we now know was being played by the Democrats. But look at this. Biden on television can't get 70 people. Actual number watching, 68. Meanwhile, Pelosi says Trump's ego trip is putting American lives at risk. They're trying to play this for all it's worth. He did a great job, it seems to me, but there were signs of a terrorist plot being hatched in Salt Lake City. An alleged plot where 100 boxes of handheld spray mist fogger machines used for press control were delivered to Salt Lake City for what? President Donald Trump's rally in Oklahoma Saturday. There were further signs that something was going to take place so that Nancy Pelosi could say, I told you so. What are they planning? Here we had a tweet. COVID positive people needed as test subjects at the Tulsa Mock Center. Or were they merely staging it to try to discourage followers from turning out? it turns out Antifa was actually blocking persons who turned out from getting in. It ought to have been dealt with forthwith. Meanwhile, they were saying if you come in a group of 4, dress, one all in white, one all in black, one in coveralls, one barefoot or wearing flip-flops to make it easy to identify you. This is unbelievable. Meanwhile, notice the pattern. No voter ID required in a series of states shown at the top. Then you see the electoral map where the Democrats are prevailing almost exclusively in the states where no voter ID is required. And now they want to resort to ballots by mail, which they're confident will enable them to steal the election. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, it's very clear that the Democrats are becoming increasingly desperate. I like your observation, Jim, that the TikTok childishness, retarded generation that now is a child up until the age of 21. And you really do see it. You have one of the greatest, most retarded generations in the history of mankind living in America right now, addicted to their childishness and their cell phones and their Facebook and their Twitter and their TikTok and their nonsense. It worries me that this is the culture of much of the generation. But this attempt to overthrow or undermine with a false flag potentially is not out of their playbook. This is not abnormal. This is what they typically do. We saw this in the Boston Marathon firecracker hoax, where they used smoke machines. Perhaps they were planning on something else. I've said for a while that I suspect they're going to kill or assassinate a high-level person to try and blame it on a Trump supporter, so that they can then have a triggering, cascading effect where they can try and infect the population with a sense of guilt that would retard them from going to the ballot boxes and voting for Trump, whether that's the assassination of Hillary Clinton and they blame on a Trump supporter, or even Joe Biden and they replace Biden with Gavin Newsom or Cuomo or someone like that. Anything's possible in this political arena, because the one thing that is definite is if Donald Trump wins election again, it is the end for China. It is a renewal of relations with Russia. I think it's a renewal of relations with Iran, because they're not a threat. I hope it would be a toning down of its Israeli operations, which is responsible for much of the degeneration in Syria. And I think it would be 4 years of resurrection and renaissance in America, where the Second Amendment would be, by executive order, declared to be the license and the permit that Americans need to carry guns, concealed and unconcealed. That's the executive order that Trump really needs to do, so that every American who wants to carry a firearm concealed and open can do so, and that makes them instant deputies that will instantly keep the peace and keep this the savagery and the criminality and the false flags down. And I hope that's going to come after he's elected, Jim.
I think those are excellent observations,
Yep.
Scott. Simply spot on. Meanwhile, we, I think, have figured out how they did the fraud for the George Floyd pretend murder. Here I got people saying, I keep telling everyone we've been punked, but it was hard to figure out exactly how they did it. I think we now know. Check out this little video clip and you'll see something rather striking. Here you see the police putting him on a gurney when they ought not to be. That should be the EMTs. But notice what's missing. He has no legs. We've been wondering what happened, why he was handcuffed and put in a police car on one side, the curb side, and then taken out on the opposite side, it's because they put him in on the curb side and they took a mannequin out on the outside. Here you can see this is no longer a handcuffed figure here, and he's completely bald, whereas he had hair before. This is Danny Cirrus with an extensive background in law enforcement who recently appeared on my show. Look closely. The body is a dummy, 100 pounds lighter. The body position is wrong. Suspect's head at the rear tire. Bystanders missing. This is staged. He was cuffed by the police as soon as he was removed from the vehicle, meaning his zone. Video cuts off at the end as they're loading the suspect in the car, meaning the police car. The next video, the suspect ends on the ground, up on the ground on the other side of the car. That's when the magic trick took place. They put the victim in on the curbside, then took the mannequin out on the street side and put it on the ground. Police kneeling. Watch closely, all actors. Real police, paramedics don't act like this. They wouldn't load a body on a gurney with hands cuffed behind his back. Handcuffs get stuck on the stretcher as they struggle getting him on. The medics have no ER equipment. They're all actors. Well, the handcuffs, they may have played a game with the handcuffs, but here's an actual mannequin. Appears to be even the one they actually were using. So the whole thing was completely staged. Absolutely unbelievably bad.
Now,
Don, yes,
one question is, they put him on the police car on one side. Why were they able to take him back out?
Of course. That's exactly right. The whole objective is to get a suspect into the police vehicle so you can take him to the precinct and book him. And the point you're making with your background slide, Don, is impeccable. Namely, the officer was leaning on his neck. We can see in the lower left. It's not the same as the officer they booked. This is all fraudulent. Scott, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's increasingly coming out, and false flags are something that we've seen as the norm rather than the oddity or the abnorm. It's again, it goes back to this whole operation of are these Masonic police? Are they CIA? Are they Mossad? Are they George Soros types? The video and the mannequin of the body is very compelling. In addition, the compelling observations of the mannequin of the treatment is, and the illogic of the process that they did matches the illogic of kneeling on someone's neck for that amount of time and not yelling out, "Stop moving! Stop moving! Stop resisting! You're under arrest." There's no vocal commands. That's not what a police officer does. So this was a theatrical activity, I think, again, designed for a coordinated operation. It wouldn't surprise me if these are military contractors, Kraft, or others. And if it's not in concert with Soros or Chinese Communist Party propaganda, this is triggered in America this outrage, this volatility, this brainwashing of the white population, so that there's this Black Lives Matter, there's this white guilt, there's all of these racial conflicts that have suddenly erupted as a result of this. But I think the more we expose it, the better, Jim.
Yes, absolutely, Scott. The more, the better. It's just the enormity of the fraud that you had race riots precipitated by fake cops and a staged killing. Fauci, I don't think a second lockdown is needed. Well, indeed, it isn't. We have a report from Switzerland, the Swiss Policy Research. Very comprehensive, very telling. It's on my blog at jamesfetzer.org. The highlights from the overview, it turns out that the overall lethality of the COVID-19 is about 0.1% in the range of a strong seasonal flu. In countries like the US, the UK, Switzerland, without lockdown, overall mortality is in the range of a strong seasonal flu. In countries like Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, overall mortality in the range of a mild seasonal flu. Even
Right.
in global hotspots, the risk of death is very modest for those in the working age or school, on the order of a daily car ride to work. Up to 80% of all test positive persons remain symptom-free, meaning they may have the virus, but they don't have the disease. Even among 70 to 79-year-olds, about 60% remain symptom-free. Over 95% of all persons who have the coronavirus develop at most moderate symptoms. Up to 60% of all persons may already have a background immunity due to contact with previous coronaviruses, such as the common cold virus.
That's
The
right.
median age of the deceased in most countries is over 80. Only about 4% of the deceased had no serious preconditions. The age and risk profile thus essentially corresponds to normal mortality. In many
How about that?
countries, up to 2/3 of the extra deaths occurred in nursing homes, which didn't benefit from a lockdown. Many cases not clear whether they really died from coronavirus or from weeks of extreme stress and isolation. Up to 30% of all additional deaths may have been caused not by coronavirus, effects of the lockdown, panic, and fear. For example, treatment of heart attacks and stroke decreased by up to 60% because patients were reluctant to go to the hospital. Even in case of so-called COVID-19 deaths, it's often unclear whether they died from or with the coronavirus.
Right.
Thus, as you could die from a heart attack, but with a tattoo. The tattoo may have made no contribution to your death. Where Scott Jensen, a state senator from Minnesota, explained how he was pressured to identify a decedent who'd never even been tested as having died from coronavirus. Many media reports of young and healthy people dying turn out to be complete fabrications. Those who did die were seriously ill, such as from undiagnosed leukemia, or in fact the age of 109 instead of the age of 9. Strong increases in regional mortality can occur when there's a collapse in the care of the elderly and sick. Questionable regulations for dealing with the deceased sometimes led to additional bottlenecks in funeral cremation services. In countries like Italy and Spain, so to some extent UK and the US, hospital overloads due to strong flu waves are not unusual. Moreover, this year, up to 15% of healthcare workers were put into quarantine. The often shown exponential curves of coronavirus cases are misleading. The number of tests are also increasing exponentially. The ratio of positive tests to tests overall, it remains constant at 5 to 25%, or increase only ever so slightly. And of course, that's consistent with the same actual number of deaths, meaning the percentage of deaths is decreasing with increased testing. Countries without curfews and contact bans, like Japan, South Korea, Belarus, or Sweden, have not experienced a more negative course of events than other countries. The fear of a shortage of ventilators was justified. It even turns out use of the ventilators can be damaging to the lungs and counterproductive. Contrary to original assumptions, studies have shown there's no evidence of the virus spreading through aerosols, tiny particles floating in the air through smear infections such as door handles or smartphones. So all this wiping down of tables and so forth in restaurants may be completely useless. There's no scientific evidence for the effectiveness of face masks in healthy or asymptomatic persons. On the contrary, such masks interfere with normal breathing, may become germ carriers. Leading doctors call them media hype and ridiculous. Many clinics in Europe and the US remain strongly underutilized or almost empty. In some cases, had to send staff home. Millions of surgeries and therapies were canceled while the hospitals remained empty. Media were caught trying to dramatize the situation, sometimes manipulating images and videos. In general, unprofessional reporting of many media maximize fear and panic. Virus test kits used internationally are prone to errors, produce false positive and false negative results. The official virus test was not clinically validated to begin with. Numerous internationally renowned experts in virology, immunology, and epidemiology consider the measures taken, the lockdowns, the face masks, and the staying at home to be counterproductive. Recommend rapid natural immunization, going outside, getting sunlight, breathing fresh air, interacting with other people, all of which keep our immune systems robust. At no time was there a medical reason for the closure of schools. The risk of disease and transmission in children is extremely low. Also, no medical reason for small classes, masks, or social distancing in schools. The claim that only severe COVID-19 but not influenza may cause severe thrombosis and pulmonary lung embolism is not true. Been known for 50 years. Severe influenza greatly increases the risk of thrombosis and embolism too. Several medical experts express coronavirus vaccines as unnecessary or even dangerous.
Right.
Vaccine against the so-called swine flu of 2009, for example, caused brain damage. And we know of a vaccine used in India brought about the paralysis of 500,000 children. And we know that vaccines commonly in use in the United States are inducing autism, where at the current rate of usage, if they continue, projections have it by 2050, half of our children will be autistic. A global influenza or corona pandemic can extend over several seasons, but many studies of a second wave are based on very unrealistic assumptions, such as constant risk of illness and death across all age groups. Nurses, for example, in New York City, described often fatal medical mismanagement of COVID patients due to questionable financial incentives or inappropriate medical protocols. Senator Jensen of Minnesota, for example, explained how the AMA was offering $13,000 for every patient identified as COVID-19 and $39,000 for every patient put on ventilators, even if that would be harmful to their health. The number of those suffering from unemployment, depression, and domestic violence as a result of the measures has reached historic records. Experts predict the measures will claim far more lives than the virus itself.
How about that?
Edward Snowden, the NASA whistleblower, warned the coronavirus crisis will be used for the permanent expansion of global surveillance. More than 600 scientists have warned of an unprecedented surveillance of society through problematic apps for contact tracing. In such countries, such contact tracing is already carried out by their Secret Service and has already been mandated in various countries. A 2019 WHO study on public health measures against pandemic influenza found that from a medical perspective, contact tracing is not recommended in any circumstances.
Right.
But already, as I observe, has become partially mandatory in several countries. Meanwhile, the corona hoax was exposed in Brazil. Members of parliament broke into a hospital that claimed to have 5,000 infected with 200 deaths, found not a single person in the hospital, which was still under construction. Even more stunning, perhaps, the Burundian president died suddenly after expelling the World Health Organization for the false pandemic. Recently, the Burundian government ordered the expulsion of experts from the WHO responsible for advising. And the next thing you know, the president who directed it is dead. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, there's a major transformation that's coming upon the United States, and I think this COVID-19 and all the hypocrisy and the propaganda is triggering this. Remember, the American people may be slow to upkeep. They may be unable to really process and understand this, like we've been talking about it, Jim, because we've been evaluating every element of this and looking at it from every angle and taking it apart and putting it back together. So we're very familiar with this, and the average American is not. And they lack the language to be able to articulate their feelings and their understanding of this. But that doesn't mean they don't have the feeling, the gut, the intuition. And that is what determines political elections. That's what's going to determine Donald Trump's victory over Joe Biden, I believe, is the raw intuition and the gut instinct that people feel towards a blithering old man who's lost his mind and is dithering and dathering, and he's got his false teeth, and he just doesn't know where he's at, and he doesn't recognize his wife from his sister. That's Joe Biden. Never mind on top of his corruption and his perversion and every evil that Joe Biden did under Barack Obama and the wars that he facilitated from George Bush 2001 onward. Biden is got a legacy of death and bloodshed, ashes, chaos, and screaming children without their parents. But Donald Trump has quite an opposite instinctive gut feeling in people, and it's one of confidence. It's one of strength. It's one of fearlessness. It's one of manhood. He is commanding and not just acting like a politician. He's commanding, and he's done command in his work projects, in his construction, in his business. Business is not a democracy. It is a military organization, if you will, with one commander, and everybody else falls in line and does what he says. So Trump's used to this. He may not have the political finesse, but he certainly overthrows the political parasitism that represents the life force of Nancy Pelosi and the other Democrats. I think people are going down and recognizing that the COVID-19 was a false flag. It was a psyop. It was an exaggeration. It was a psychological operation. It was manipulation by the mainstream media and the transgender hermaphrodites like Anderson Cooper and Don Lemon and all of these other fools who have been shouting the Chicken Little, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And Americans are going, nothing's falling. No one's dying. No one that I know has died. No one below the age of 80 has died. And anybody who's over the age of 80 is lucky to be on this earth in the first place. They're not as strong as you are, Jim. But people who are 85 and 90, that's when you die. Your lungs and your body give out. So to say that this is some epidemic is all nonsense. But it tells us, and they did try and create a bottleneck. I think it's breaking open. It's sad that this took so long. It's sad that more Americans didn't go outside with pitchforks and firebrands and say, to hell with all of you. We're going to tar and feather Gavin Newsom and all of these other Democrat tyrants. We're going to burn down your Capitol like we did in 1812 if you try and burn down our liberties and our Constitution. It's sad that volatility didn't come out, but it's also understandable because we have an effeminate, confused, medicated society where you have more castrated beta males who just want to please people than you have real leaders that want to defend their freedom, their liberty, their patriotism. But that being said, I think you're having a separation in America between the sheep and the goats, the beta males and the non, and people are rising up saying this whole thing is a shame. It's disgusting what we've done to ourselves. We have done this. Trump owns this because he started this whole thing. Granted, he's trying to dig himself out of the hole, and I think he's doing a good job. But the Democrats are going to try and keep him in the hole. But he owns this, and that's why he has to travel the country nonstop and have thousands upon thousands of people at his rallies to raise the sun, if you will. And in the rise of the sun and rise of the dawn and the light that his rallies generate, the darkness of the memory of the COVID-19 bullshit and all the propaganda is just naturally going to disintegrate and fall away. And then the Democrats have what? What do they have to play against Trump then? There's no COVID. There's no second wave. Everybody knows this is bull. And what else are you going to do? You're going to try and assassinate Biden or Hillary Clinton to try and trigger people into white guilt. You're going to have another Black Lives Matter march. The only thing keeping these Black Lives Matter and Antifa lunatics alive are the police. The moment the police are taken out is the moment the good old boys get their AR-15s and defend their land like they did in Utah. Say, you may come out, but you won't be leaving. Jim?
I think you got it right, Scott. I think you got it exactly right.
Yeah.
And
real
Yeah,
quickly.
go ahead, Don.
Your point number 27, you didn't say that 1.6 billion people will lose their livelihoods because of all this shutdown and things. 1.6 billion, and the statistics worldwide show that only about 400,000 people have lost their lives. 1.6 billion compared to 400,000, that's like 1 in 100,000 people. So it's just really awesome that for this minor thing, everybody is in chaos and we're losing society. We're going back into the jungle.
Great catch, Don. Yes. Estimate 1.6 billion losing their livelihood. Meanwhile, President Trump signed a police reform executive order. Here's what it will do. Calls for increased transparency and accountability for police misconduct, a limit on the use of chokeholds, increased use of non-police personnel to deal with issues related to mental health or drug addiction. It establishes a national certification and credentialing system for law enforcement agencies, creates a federal database to track officers credibly accused of wrongdoing, discourages the use of chokeholds unless an officer's life is in danger, encourages Congress to pass further reforms. He met with families of the victims, that they were wonderful people. It's so sad they had lost their lives. Meanwhile, the Democrats were slamming Trump and GOP proposals before they'd even laid eyes on it. What's surprising there? Meanwhile, a former D.C. chief of police praises Trump's police reforms. This is former D.C. police chief Charles Ramsey praising the move as very positive in the right direction. He told CNN's Brooke Baldwin he believes this is a step in the right direction. I really didn't expect the president to come up with some groundbreaking recommendations, quite frankly, but at least it's a step in the right direction. Policing, for the most part, is done at the local and state level. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. Meanwhile, we know, sociological studies dating way back. This is from April 2019, relatively recent, confirmed more cops, less crime. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, one thing that Trump needs to do is he needs to create a 12-man team, and I wrote it there. He needs to create a 12-man rapid reaction special forces sort of team of special operations soldiers, officers, to deploy to these areas of false flag operations. So you have a 12-man team broken up into four parts, each one representing a 3-man team. 3-man teams, one goes to the site where this false flag occurs. And they reconnoiter it. They position themselves. And remember, these are long-range scout types. So these guys are prepared with a backpack to sleep in an alleyway. All they need is a canteen and money for food. But they go to the site. Another team goes to the police. Another team goes to the military. Another team goes to the federal building. And another team goes to the political building. You have 3-man teams that have to instantly capture the ground of where this false flag attack occurred, such as in New Zealand, such as in Black Lives or the Boston Marathon bombing, such as in this Chauvin George Floyd incident. The fact that Trump doesn't have a special reaction team that I can see that instantly goes and blankets and constricts and puts a stranglehold on these areas and can instantly report to the president if this is a false flag, who the actors are, is it a foreign intelligence operation? This is a military, national defense, homeland incident issue. This is a domestic terrorism threat. Look at what's happened as a result of this trigger. As a result of lighting this gunfire, this gunpowder trail, it has led back to the powder keg of riots in Minneapolis, riots in New York City, riots in Georgia, riots in Seattle, a shutdown of an entire Seattle area. Tucker Carlson has done a very good job in articulating how this is a descent into savagery and this is all about overthrowing Donald Trump. The madness of shutting down the police works against them because everybody of common sense looks to the Democrats who want this as insane. But Trump really needs, and I've said it before, he needs an inspector general czar and he needs a special 12-man team. Perhaps he needs to enfold it under the Inspector General Czar team, because this is waste, fraud, and abuse. It's an unconstitutional violation of the principle of trust between the people and the government. The Smith-Mundt Act does not change anything. You are not allowed to tell the American people lies and pretend they're truth and get paid for it by the taxpayers. It's like, performing medical experiments on them, poisoning them, and telling them you're feeding them good, healthy turkey sandwiches.
Mhm.
The violation and the hypocrisy, Trump really needs to get ahead of. So this is the time that he really needs special teams of people around him, and not these jackalopes like Reince Priebus or all these other half-wits, including Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner reminds me of Woody, the Toy Story cowboy without a hat. All of these clowns have totally, diminished Trump's performance. And I'll tell you, this election is not his in the bag, Jim. He could lose this if he does not really get a lot more manly and change a lot of the direction, and I think really take much more control. And he needs to be out there more and being much more volatile and aggressive. Go ahead.
Well, I think, Scott, that he's letting the Democrats expose themselves. Oh, I had one more slide showing, of course, that this is all grossly exaggerated. This is a manufactured problem, that blacks killed by blacks occur at a phenomenal rate of 53.94 per million members, but blacks killed by whites, 0.77 per 100 million. Whites killed by whites, 10.22. Roughly a fifth of blacks killed by blacks, but about the same rate as whites are killed by blacks, where blacks are killed by whites at around 1/10 of the rate at which whites are killed by blacks. All completely exaggerated. But of course, the mainstream media won't give you information like this because they don't want you to know. They practice special pleading. They talk about only this phenomenon, the occasions when blacks are killed by whites, and ignore all the data generally, typical of propaganda and disinformation. Meanwhile, Bolton says Trump asked China to help to get him reelected. This is just absurd. What is this, another variation of Russia helping Trump? Trump didn't need help. I'm hard-pressed to identify any significant Trump decision during my tenure that wasn't driven by re-election calculations, Bolton wrote. This is completely absurd. If you want the most blatant refutation of that claim, shutting down the country, shutting down the economy to save American lives. Everyone knows a strong economy and a soaring stock market were Trump's greatest allies in seeking re-election. He nevertheless was willing to sacrifice them by putting the interests of the American people first and shutting down the economy. We know now he was given false information, but he was acting in the interests of the people, not based upon re-election calculation. Bolton is not only lying about that, but as Trump observed, the whole thing is made up of lies and fake stories, said all good about me until the day I fired him, a disgruntled, boring fool who only wanted to go to war, never had a clue, was ostracized and happily dumped what a dough. Murray comments, Trump at time of hiring, I only hired the best people. Trump afterwards, worst person I ever met. Well, he got to know him better, for God's sake. Meanwhile, just to illustrate the absurdity of the claim that Trump asked China to help him get reelected, and frankly, I'm baffled. I can't imagine how China would have been able to make a contribution. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, he attended the meeting between Trump and Xi at the Group of 20 in Osaka. Never heard Trump appealing to Xi to buy more agricultural products to ensure winning re-election. When asked about Bolton's recollection of the event, absolutely untrue. Never happened. I was there. I have no recollection of that ever happening. I don't believe it's true. I don't believe it ever happened. Would I recollect something as crazy as that? Of course, I would recollect. Bolton is a massive liar. He now declares he can't vote for Donald Trump. Well, big effing deal. No one gives a damn what John Bolton thinks. The Telegraph of the UK interpreted Bolton's statement as an endorsement for Vice President Joe Biden. But a Bolton spokeswoman issued a statement denying that. The ambassador never said he planned to vote for Joe Biden. He has consistently said in recent days he's writing in the name of a conservative Republican, let there be no doubt. He will not be voting for Trump or for Biden. Scott, your thoughts here. I think that, Bolton has long since worn out his welcome.
Bolton will be lucky to survive this. Bolton will be lucky to leave his house in one piece, because there's one thing that Donald Trump inspires, and that is love and loyalty for him and a fierce defense of him that people feel. Why? Because, again, they see Donald Trump as very similar to them. They see him and in a sense want to live their life vicariously through his escalation and evolution from blue-collar working to investing to real estate construction and building of an empire. There's a noble heroism and a charmed life component to Donald Trump's victory and past that people really celebrate, because they celebrate America in his success. That's why some of these blacks like Jesse Jackson and others have used Donald Trump as a term for success, economic success, beautiful women success, whatever you want to call it. So Bolton represents everything ugly and senile and stupid and enslaving and betrayal. This is treachery. This is hypocrisy. This is really demeans. I didn't think Bolton could sink any lower, but this really demeans him below zero. He is even worse now, if you can imagine that, because, again, there's a great quote in Braveheart where William Wallace says, "There's a difference between us. You see the people in this country as to provide you with position. I see your position is to provide these people with freedom, and I go to see that they have it." Bolton and the Democrats and these parasites in politics all see the American people as just a bunch of dumb as a bag of rocks, blithering idiots who watch The Simpsons and are out of their minds. And the United States and the United States government is an endless revolving door for them. And they work in government as their own personal Hollywood career. Bolton has been in politics, since Reagan's administration, but he's never done anything. He's never led men. He's never been in the military. He's never created organizations or created jobs. He is a parasite, just like Joe Biden's a parasite, just like Barack Obama, just like Hillary Clinton, just like Bill Clinton. These people are parasitic lawyers, which everybody hates already, that just go into politics and don't really do anything. They move food around on the plate. So this is something Trump needs to say. Look, I give these people jobs. I try my best to bring them into the fold, to try and, say maybe there's something I can learn. I did learn a few things about Bolton. He's a psychopath. He's a lunatic. He's a warmonger. It reminded me of why I was elected, not to advance these policies. I learned what they were coming from. But John Bolton looks at all of you like he's the slave master and you're working on his plantation. I'm like you. I worked hard. I made something of myself. I ran for election because I needed to. I couldn't not run for election because everybody else up there was a piece of garbage and looking to exploit and destroy this country. And that seemed to resonate with the American people when I ran. I said, look at everybody around here. These are a bunch of clowns. And everybody said, yes, we agree. So Trump needs to say, I'm like you. You and I are the same, America. We have the same sort of ideas and DNA. That's why I love you. All these other people on the Democrat side and the John Boltons and the Rhinos and the Mitt Romneys, all of these people look at you like slaves on their plantation. You want to be a slave? You choose them. If you want to live in freedom and prosperity and make something of your life and have more of your money at the end of the day, choose me as your president, and you will have more success, more money, more freedom than you've ever had in the next 4 years. Jim?
Oh,
Yeah.
Scott, I think
Love
you
you.
put it so very well. Don, did you want to add?
Well, I would add only the name of Fauci in there too. He seems to be a dictator for health and based on all wrong assumptions by the health experts who are controlling uh, everything, and so it's pretty bad. Anyway, carry on.
You got it right. You got it right, Don. Meanwhile, 55% believe Biden has dementia. This is not very promising prospect for the Democratic nominee presumptive, that a 55% of likely voters believe he's in the early stages of dementia. Frankly, I think it's more advanced than that. He's clearly brain damaged from multiple aneurysm and cognitively impaired. He does not have a bright future. Meanwhile, Trump now says Anthem Nealer Kaepernick deserves a shot at the NFL. This, I think, removes another bone of contention, another reason to oppose Trump by respecting the right of an NFL player to express his dissatisfaction with policies in the United States. If he deserves it, he should, referring to the question of whether Kaepernick ought to return to the NFL in an interview with Sinclair Broadcast Group. If he has a playing ability, he started off great, then he didn't end up very great in terms of a player. I always thought he was very striking, rangy, versatile. I was astonished the first time I saw him play. Meanwhile, Brett Favre, and this is now a statement just published today, says Colin Kaepernick is like Pat Tillman, should receive the same hero status. That his decision to risk his football career to continue his protests and police brutality is a sacrifice, similar to former NFL player and Army Ranger Pat Tillman. That's quite a stunning and powerful endorsement. Meanwhile, a Shaz shop owner, mayhem beyond mayhem. The Seattle police ignored 911 calls. I think our mayor and governor need to get their act together. They need to come up with a plan because this is way beyond the protest. Meanwhile, Black Lives Matter supporting mayor now says she's a victim of domestic terrorism after her home in Olympia, Washington was vandalized during a demonstration. Meanwhile, the city, this is Albuquerque, announces certain 911 calls will be responded to by social workers.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, a top House Democrat throws cold water on the far left defund the police movement. This is Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, the House Majority Whip, who can see this is a losing proposition. He's trying to regain lost ground, but frankly, it's not going to come back. Nobody is going to defund the police, he suggests. Meanwhile, another great boost for Trump, beyond expectation. Retail sales jumped 17.7% in May as the economy reopened, the largest increase in history. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting to watch the Mayor de Blasio walk into a police auditorium or big building, and all the police stand up and leave the moment he walks in. If you saw that video, that's quite telling. So all of the police in New York look at de Blasio as a piece of garbage and a hypocrite, synonymous with all of the Democrat reputations, of course. And the police are embraced and supported by the majority of people, and I think majority of Republicans. Yes, there are bad behaviors and arrogant, parasitic treatment of people. There's farming money from the people with traffic stops and all of these things. Yes, yes, yes. We've seen that. People can affirm their rights and they can certainly sue. And there are police that need to be yanked back on a chain to keep them in line. But you do not dissolve the entire force and turn us over to anarchy. Did we not learn anything in Iraq, for example, when Bremer dissolved the entire military in Iraq, and the whole country went into sectarian violence? That's what happens when you dissolve a police force or a military force. Bremer did it. Iraq fell apart. The Shia and the Sunnis fought. The same thing would happen in America. You'd have blacks, Hispanics, Asians. If the police were gone, you would have a mafia criminal sort of state. You would have, quote, The Purge, that film. I don't think it's going to go that far. I don't think anybody, if they're an adult, and is going to embrace that. This does show that there may be some Democrats who are rising up saying you've lost your minds if you try and dissolve the police. The Trump is right when he says, I'm just letting it happen. I'm just letting Seattle happen. I'm showing the American public, look at what you have. Look at what they do. This is their instinct. This is their desire. The Democrats love this. They thrive on it. They want more of it. And I'm not going to tolerate it, but I'm going to let it happen so you see exactly what choice you have. So I think Trump is right to let these festering boils of pus and poison and insanity remain, so that you have a stinking wound that provides the proper, funky stench that keeps people away. There's a reason that you keep away from rotting, diseased animals. It's because the stench that they give off. And I think the same stench is coming out of the Antifa, lunatic, Black Lives Matter, Seattle types. Go ahead.
Oh, Scott, I think you're 100% correct about that. And very, very disturbing that in New York City, maybe the greatest city in the world, that we have this absurdity that the mayor is not supporting the police. It's going to turn into just a catastrophic situation. And I think that what we're going to see will be, warlords taking over territory, not just the Bloods and the Crips, but they're going to be areas where no white person can walk, for example, or no Asian, or no one who belongs to a rival gang. I mean, it's going to just reduce to a third world level. It appears, by the way, that many of the big firms like Tiffany and so forth didn't mind the looting. Business had been so bad, they were glad to have looters break in so they could make insurance claims. That is disgusting. That's an unethical business practice. Meanwhile, Don, I know we're on the verge and you need to take us out. Your thoughts?
Oh, are we ever on the verge? The whole America is on the verge. Things are really wild. And I will say it's probably mainly because America is ruled by lies and truth is completely absent here. Is that right? An American population doesn't seem to mind. They tolerate it. And ruled by lies is now the American way. Now, that is not the way it should be in New York and every place. But when that truth is politicized, all is lost. So it's really pretty heavy here. So, yes, this is the first hour of Truth versus News on June 22nd. Right edge of summer, the hottest time, best time of the year, supposedly. There in America, down here in tropics, it's nice winter time, beautiful time. But this is Truth versus News. I'm your producer, JD.Consultants, live.com. This is the first hour. You want to come back for that second hour. We've got lots more heavy things to throw your way. Hopefully you can catch some of it.